We should create a podcast.
About what?
I don't know. What about making? We always talk about it.
Yeah, I mean, we talk about that every day. I mean, we can talk about, all the stuff we talk about, 3D printing, creativity in general, modeling.
Yeah, absolutely. You know what? We should call it Maker Everything.
Well, it's kind of everything that we really talk about all the time. Yeah, that's a good idea.
Well, welcome to the Maker Everything podcast. So welcome to the Maker Everything podcast. I'm Bryan DeLuca from Maker Build It.
And I'm Todd Saal from the Creative Mind Trip.
So this is the first episode of Maker Everything. On this podcast, we're going to cover everything that has to do with makers, including creativity, which is a core part of every maker's sort of arsenal, as well as innovation. So many innovations have come out of people, even historically, that are sort of part of the maker community. So we're also going to have a lot of really cool special guests on this podcast, as well as having live events, some live tutorials, and other things you're going to want to make sure you're around to see.
All right, so some of the topics we're going to cover is everything from 3D printing, all the different facets, because it's grown so much over the last couple of years, traditional sculpting, 3D modeling, electronics, and a variety of other things as well. All right, so let's get into the first episode. So, what's a maker to you?
Wow, how do I define a maker? So to me, a maker is almost any creative person that's actually making something, right? Think about the word maker. So they're actually taking what's in their mind, what's in their creativity, something they've thought about, and they said, okay, how do I make this real? And that could be anything from doing a 3D model and 3D printing it to taking cardboard and forming it into something else, right? To more complicated things where you're making sort of things that are electromechanical, right? You may have something that actually has electronics that then has moving parts or lights up. So all of that, to me, is a maker.
Yeah, I mean, for me, to add on to that, I mean, I agree with everything there. To me, it's also kind of a mindset as to how we approach problems and challenges that we're faced, and ultimately creating a solution to a problem and make stuff.
Right. I think one of the most interesting thing about makers, or at least a lot of the ones I know, a lot of times they're starting off with whatever they have, right? It's interesting because you could watch a maker and they'll have a piece of wood and they're going to turn that into whatever, a sculpture, or they may even turn that into a hammer handle.
Yeah, I mean, and that's sort of my thing about it. You've got some problem that you're trying to solve, and you're making something out of that, and the process that you go through in order to resolve those problems. We rely on so many different things.
Absolutely.
We rely on each other. I mean, we also have only a certain skill set, so you may rely on somebody else who's got a better skill set at whatever that task that you're really trying to do.
Well, I think that's a good point because the maker community does share a lot of stuff, right? And people build
Very
on
much so.
Other people's work. I think there's also, one of the things that also strikes me is I don't want to say two camps of makers because that's really the wrong thing, but there are the people that are sort of like, they want to create technical things.
Right.
And they're people that are more on the art side. And not that those can't be similar and overlap.
All right. So with that mindset there is, can the maker definition be a lot broader in today's day and age, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Because, I mean, we have different backgrounds, but yet we have this common overlap that we have that is sort of the same type of thing.
Right.
We're incredibly curious about things we don't know about, constantly trying to learn new things and new ways of doing things. You're a writer by trade. Would you consider writing as in that maker pool, in that definition?
In some ways, I think you can.
Right, even though it's sort of, I mean, because there is a tangible outcome to that, right?
There is. It is creating, right, and is making something, right? And it's interesting because when you look at that, there are writers that not just write, they create other things, like they may create the art for their book. You know what I'm saying? Like they do a lot of those. So I think it is in that mindset, like you mentioned earlier, of creativity.
Yeah, when we kind of look at, how we go and approach things, I think one thing is going down the rabbit hole.
Right.
One thing is going to lead into, something else, and just by observing somebody doing it a certain way,
Right.
Different things may pop up into our head and go down there.
Absolutely. And I think one of the things to really understand, like what is a maker? It's really anyone, to me, at least my definition, they're using their creativity, their mind, the innovation, the stuff they have around them sometimes. It's not necessarily even having the finest whatever tools to do things.
Totally.
Right?
It's adapting to the situation that you have in front of you.
They're going and making stuff and literally taking what's in their mind and creating something, whether they're welding something or do you know what I mean? They're creating some sort of electronics. That to me encompasses the heart of the maker, right? The creativity of the maker is being able to think about something, come up with some idea, whether it's crazy, whether it's, something that's useful, and actually being able to go and produce it, because there are so many things that people make that are so cool. I mean, you look at some of the people that do cosplay costumes.
Oh, it's amazing.
It's insane. I was watching this one video of this woman who made like a centaur outfit, So it was pretty cool, and she actually used fish wire to move the back legs.
Right.
Which was really crazy,
Yeah. So it's something like that is like not something that I would probably be interested is like an application, but some of the intricacies of that and maybe might spark something that I can use in maybe something else that I was doing or something.
Even if you're making like an articulating 3D model, same principle, right? If you need to make it move, you may wind up using that same sort of technique to do that.
Yeah, definitely makes sense.
But I think, and what about you? How do you define it? I mean, you sort of talked about it a little bit.
Yeah, I would say first and foremost, it's definitely a mindset. As you said, there's problems and solutions to make something, and how we go about that is really what does it for me.
Right.
It's I'm constantly learning. And that fact of trying to learn new things and do, 3D printing. You and I got into that how many years ago, at least in conversation. And I wasn't really interested in it because I was not interested in making the 3D printer a better 3D printer.
Right.
I wanted to make things.
Right.
And I didn't want to go through that from a budget perspective.
Yeah. And I mean, look, if you've been 3D printing for a while, you know how 3D printers were even 2-3 years ago.
Yeah.
It was like if you weren't a tinkerer, not that even a baker, right? A tinkerer, meaning like you wanted to mess around with this thing and spend hours whatever leveling your bed, I
think the application of whatever you're trying to do. So and that's when, as things have improved a bit, that when I know I got into it even just a few years ago, it improved enough where we can still tweak things at the budget level printers, but once you dug into the details and made and knew how they work, then you didn't have to worry about that as much. Now I can make things.
Well, I think it's it's interesting because I think with any skill, right? If you don't have the fundamentals, right? Think about it. You wind up not being able to. You can still create stuff. Don't misunderstand what I'm saying, but it's a lot harder in the process once you have those fundamentals in there. This is probably a whole other episode to talk about. So I don't want to go too far off topic, guys. But it's one of those things where having those fundamentals, like setting up that printer, having it so you could actually be creative now with the printer itself, get into the design and not have to worry about, is my bed level or is my bed hot enough
but to a person that is a low level tinkerer on the mechanical side may enjoy that.
Absolutely.
And that for guys like you and I, we need people like that because we don't want to deal with that.
Right. Absolutely. And I think, think about it. I mean, 3D printing was created by, I forgot the guy's name, but he was an engineer, right? And but think about it, he was a maker in some ways, even though he was an engineer. To come up with the concept of being able to take things, remold them, or print them in resin, right? that concept was innovative at that time to sort of think about it that way and now go and create something that could actually do that.
Yeah, I noticed once I got out of the tech field, which was sort of my main expertise years ago, and got out of that, I found now I'm more totally on the creative side.
Right.
But I found that I was missing that daily dose of, curiosity, problem solving, all of that stuff, and getting deeper into sort of a maker aspect of things helped me get back into that. And that honestly helped, my creative art side, to a greater degree.
It's interesting because you say that, because it's when, if I think about myself, like when I was a little kid, right? I was always creating stuff, like no matter what it was, right?
It's same here.
Right. It's like those little kids that are really into Legos and they don't even follow the instructions anymore, right? They just go and build whatever they want to build because they want to build whatever it is or see what they could build out of this Lego set versus going, here's part 1, part 2, part 3, and just following it and building whatever it is that they're going to build out of the Lego set, right? Which predetermined. They're actually going, well, let me see what else I could make out of this, right? And I think that's one of the parts, probably for some of us, it's how we are, right? I think most makers, it's how they are as a person. When you get your daily dose of your creativity or whatever the case is, it's just really being able to dig in and figure out what you want to make. Every time you turn around, and I think a good point, right? I think you said this earlier, is like that creative approach to everything. You need to fix something. Like I was doing a giant cosplay hammer and I was like, you know what? It's going to be too heavy. Let me stick a wooden dowel.
Yeah.
Right? Into the shaft so it has some more support. So it's just looking at things and going, how do I make it?
It's problem solving.
Right. How do I make it the way I want to make it? Yeah.
But that's why I say it's big on a mindset. You're either thinking in those ways, and you can be taught different ways to be more efficient and all of those kinds of things.
Absolutely.
But if to me, and that's why I'm big on the whole mindset thing, because it's if you are not constantly curious and not trying things, I think you miss a big portion of that.
I agree.
And also then creating balance, because my wife constantly, for as long as I know her, she calls me a tinkerer. So, in my earlier days, is like I would, being a musician as well, I would take guitar pedals apart.
Right.
I worked with a friend of mine who was an amateur amp builder, and we actually blew stuff up, not on purpose, but but that's how we learn.
It's true.
So it's interesting to be able to create, as you said earlier, a good foundation to then experiment and allow yourself to experiment, and then understand those happy accidents that happen, and then be able to reproduce them and then explore even further is a big deal.
Yeah, and I think one of the things about makers too is they're, I don't want to say relentless, like they get onto something and they just complete it, right? They get to the point, like most of them, they don't, because here's the thing, you mentioned failure, right? Things blowing up.
Yep.
You're going to experience failure when you're creating. You're going
to learn more from the failures, as the cliche goes, right?
And it's like not being determined by that failure or the fact that you may fail at the first time you're creating whatever it is, right? Or if you're 3D printing, your 3D print fails. You're not just going to stop. You're going to figure out
you want to know why it failed.
Why did it fail? Let me go fix the supports, let's say, and then move on.
For me, it's still, at the end of the day, is the end result is almost kind of anticlimactic, right? It's like, so it's like, all right, that worked. It's cool. Great.
Right.
Next.
Yeah.
What did I learn from that? And then take those lessons and then build upon that stuff.
How many times have you completed something and you're like, oh, you know what? I'm going to add LEDs.
Right? Exactly.
And you're like, oh, I just added a whole other complexity to like whatever this is, right? Now I got to redesign it, or I got to do this, or maybe I'm, taking it apart again. So, it's interesting. So here's the question though. It's the question you start off with. What is a maker? Based on everything we discussed, what is a maker?
A problem solver, I would say, first and foremost, right? So a problem solver and figuring out creative ways to create stuff, you know, in a weird way, right? I mean,
right. Being innovative.
yeah, exactly. Maybe that's a more elegant way of putting it instead of just creating stuff.
I think I'm going to go back to my original definition when you first asked me. It's someone you're dreaming up something, and then you go out there and you're determined and you make it happen, and you actually make that object into reality, right?
Yeah, I think to maybe just expand upon that, it's like I even think there's aspects of that where a style of maker is taking like what you're saying, what are the ideas, you know, and maybe that person doesn't have the wherewithal, the fundamental skill set to do that, can articulate that to somebody else,
100%.
and then that person can then go and think of further ideas of how to execute that, and then it becomes almost a partnership. And this is where your comment about community and the maker community is grown so much more than say when we were both younger. That I think it does fit this more broader scope. I mean, cosplay. Was cosplay even in like the maker?
No,
you know,
I don't even know.
You know,
we're lucky we had costumes for Halloween. You know,
exactly.
Kids,
you know, so I mean, it's so much broader in its.
And I think that is a good point, because you know it's you know, if you don't have, like, you're really good at designing stuff, but you don't have the skill set at electronics, right? So you're partnering someone they're going to do the electronics part. And I think that is a good part, you know, a huge part of the maker community, and a good part. You know, it's a good community where everyone's here to support each other. And what's nice about it to me, so many people put their tutorials online.
Yeah.
So you can look at what people are doing, how they're doing it, and actually work on that to evolve what you're doing.
Well, I think, you know, the maker in all of us, I think the teaching aspect of it is a natural progression, right?
Absolutely.
Because I know for myself, I always like to teach what I'm learning. I always wind up getting a better and a deeper understanding of whatever the topic may be.
Absolutely.
When I try to teach it to somebody, because there's going to be questions that they're going to ask that I'm definitely not going to know.
Yeah, and I think what happens is makers are so passionate
Yeah,
about what they do.
agreed.
They want to share, right?
Yeah.
And they want to share because they've also, a lot of times, maybe if they're creating something really complex, they've struggled, right? So how do you get around that? How do you get around that complexity and create other stuff? So thank you for joining us for the first episode of Maker Everything. I'm Bryan DeLuca from Maker Build It.
I'm Todd Saal from the Creative Mind Trip.
And make sure you subscribe to our podcast and our YouTube channel.